It's pride in standing before you all today. Viksit Bharat at 2047, the voice of youth, is an initiative by the Government of India to make India a developed nation by 2047, the 100th year of its independence. The role of youth, who constitute our largest population group, has a huge role here as they will lead India to Viksit Bharat by 2047. Therefore, it is important to channelize the innovative ideas of the youth into nation building by inviting them to ideate and contribute the vision of Viksit Bharat by 2047. Under this aegis, the Department of Economics had held a roundtable conference on 25th January, and now we have a speaker session today here with Dr. Arvind Veermani, sir. Dr. Arvind Veermani, currently a member of Niti Aayog, is amidst us today. He was appointed as India's representative to the International Monetary Fund in 2009, and prior to that, he served as the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. He was the Director and Chief Executive of Indian Council for Research and International Economic Relations and has published 37 journal articles, 24 books and book chapters, and around 70 working papers and 50 policy papers in macroeconomics, growth, tax and tariff reform, foreign exchange, international relations, and national security strategy. He was the founder chairman of EAGLE, chairman of Policy Foundation, member, Board of Governors in Center for Policy Research, non-resident senior fellow in Brookings, affiliate professor and distinguished senior fellow in George Mason University, USA, and there are many more feathers to his hat. He has been a key figure in Indian macroeconomics and policy reform, and we are honored to have you amongst us today, sir. We welcome you. I'd also like to thank Professor Suman Sharma, our principal, for letting us host this event today. And I'd like to welcome our staff advisors, all the faculty members, our student body, the organizing committee, and everybody here who could make it today. Thank you. We welcome you all. Now, without further ado, I think I can hand over the stage to you, sir. So it's all yours.
Sorry.
So do you finish it?
Do you have the control? I can speak from there. You have a control there?
Sir, you can see.
No. What about the PowerPoint?
Sir, it's there.
Ah, it's behind me.
Yes, sir.
So maybe I'll just stand.
All right.
Yeah? Okay.
Should
Let
we
me
get
just
the
have a
coffee
sip.
then?
Okay. I just want that. That's all. It's up there. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I've been in and out of think tanks and academics probably half my life in think tanks and half in government. But I still have that academic approach. I tend to speak too much, so I hope you'll forgive me. I try to stick to my time. And also, given that so many of you are here, actually the last time I spoke in Punjab University in Chandigarh, and I was surprised that in the whole audience, there were about 3 males. Of course, this is a women's college, so only my person from my office is here who's a male, but it's good to have. So I have actually got 2 or 3 slides where I want to address women's issues. But let me, welcome all of you and just start, because like I said, I usually run out of time. Of course, in the question answer, who you will be conducting, right? I'm very happy to answer questions because, I speak to diverse audiences and it's very hard to focus the talk on different audiences, but I always welcome questions and clarifications. Okay, so, and as you see, I put down for the first time, I've not done it, there's at the bottom you see at X, so in case you want to follow my economic and foreign policy comments, I think you may find it useful for the future, those of you who are on social media. Okay, let's see, how does it go? This one. Which What do I press? How do I move this? Oh, you're going to do it? Yeah. To the right. Is तरफ? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so the goal, as already mentioned, is to become a developed country. The question is, what does it mean? Usually, the main way we measure is in terms of average income or per capita GDP. If you are all done economics, you will know what that means. And this is defined, there are four categories: low income country, lower middle income country, upper middle income country, and high income country. These are defined by the World Bank, and I use those criteria, but then I translate it into what is called per capita GDP at PPP, because that's the only way to compare countries, in my view, and a view of many economists who worked on these issues. So even though the original definitions are in terms of current income, I use those because if we are to project into the future, you have to project real things. Nominal things can go all over the place. Many people you will read in the newspapers have no idea about projections. We can only really project, if you're talking about 10 years and 30 years, you can only project real growth. Okay, so that has to be done in terms of PPP, what we call, especially if you want to compare with other countries. So we are currently a LMIC, a lower middle income country. We plan to become or expect to become an upper middle income country by around 2030. In some of the projections I will show you at the end, it comes at 2031. And then from upper middle to high income country by 2047 around. Now people often say, well, you're just talking about per capita income, what does it mean? Well, it turns out if you do a careful analysis, which I did in a 2009 paper, and I'll show you some graphs again, that basically social indicators, if you look across the world, social indicators move more or less in line with per capita GDP. So I will tell you how that happens. So how do we expect to do this? In one line, it is sustained, fast, inclusive growth. The inclusive is very important. We often focus on the economists like me, macroeconomists, focus on sustained and fast growth, but that inclusive part is very important. And then I'll give you a quick overview of the strategy. Like I said, I like to talk about it because of my experience. Probably, given my age, probably there's nobody else in the country who's spent as much time in both government and academics. So I will like to give you, how we think of strategy. How do we achieve this? How do we think about these things? And of course, you get into investment, employment, growth, and connected to that is revenues. We keep talking about expenditures on social. You don't get revenues, you don't get expenditures. Okay? And then, of course, promoting inclusion and empowerment. Then I'll say something about the future trends and developments and the weakness and opportunities, and focus, as I said, a little bit more than I often do, except when I'm speaking of women. So women's empowerment, skilling and employment. And then at the end I will give you the projections which I mentioned. I always wonder whether I should give the projections in the beginning or the end. If you have a view, let me know at the end of the talk. Next. So what is the overall strategy? So in a way I'm going to tell you what is the recent and current strategy, and some of the new things I'll tell you later, okay? Because you must understand where we are coming from. This is the overall strategy will prevail over the next 5 years. I expect the same government to be back in power, so this will be the strategy, okay? But I'm giving you the perspective from the back, from the past. So there are three elements of the strategy. And the main one, which is the fast sustained growth one, I call it Indian market economy. There are many forms of market economies. Generally, we think of American form, the European form, and then I call it Indic just to distinguish it. And what's the difference? The point is our markets are incomplete and imperfect, so we focus on making sure the economy functions competitively and fewer monopoly segments, that they are complete and efficient markets. This cannot be taken for granted as they do in America and in between in Europe. And there are lots of information barriers and asymmetric information. I won't have time to go into the information part of it, but it's very important. It's just to give you an idea of why Indian is a bit different from the American and the European. And the key element here, which we've refined over the last 20 years, and particularly very clearly in the last 10 years, is the role of the government and private sector in all this development. So government has to focus on public goods provision and regulation of externalities, creating the market environment. I already mentioned promotion, competition and investment, and then look after welfare transfers. This is the inclusive part of that simple sentence. And the empowerment. And that's one of the key differences in the last 10 years. I have a paper in EPW, which I think was 2002, where I talked about. So this is another Indian thing, so to say. You know, we focus more on the empowerment because there is so much need for it. You'll get an idea later. So, and then what is the role of the private sector? It must compete, innovate, and invest. They have to do the hard work. So government creates the environment, make sure everybody is empowered, and then the private sector has to do its job. Very simply. The NGOs are there somewhere, but I can't go into every detail, so I'll focus on these. So the NGOs also have a role, which is basically to fill up that inclusive part of it. Okay, and I, in skilling, in many others, if I have time, I'll give you some examples. So next. So that first part, how do we ensure that first, to have a competitive market economy? So we've done a lot of policy reforms in the last 10 years. It's built on reforms done in previous years, previous decades. I was intimately involved with the 91 reforms. The last part I think you mentioned, I forgot to thank you for your comments. But there we focused on products and financial sector. So there were a lot of things left, which is what we have been trying to do in the last 10 years, which is factor markets like labor markets, capital markets, information markets, etc., etc. The public sector reforms, which we couldn't touch because they are big vested interests, deliberately. We thought of all these things in 91. And that has been done, is being done over the last 10 years. And then look at every product and services which is left. One of the good examples of that is the space sector. In the old days, we always used to think space is for the government, ISRO, etc. But you find since we liberalized 3 years ago, there are like 50 companies who are in the space sector. Of them, about 5 of them are already selling products and services abroad. So the words which I should repeat here: private sector, compete, innovate, invest. But the government has to make sure the environment is right. Okay, so these are the keys. Okay, we did that. Sorry, we mentioned bureaucratic. Yeah, sorry. I got carried away. So factor markets, institutional reforms. You heard of IBC, the Monetary Policy Committee, GST. You must have heard of because you have to pay it. But the GST is very important. Because the framers of the constitution were very good. Actually, if you look back, the economics is very sound. Except they didn't realize we need a single market, and we had separate product taxes. So, sorry.
Technological development and creating industry.
Oh, GST is a tax.
Also about
Sorry, who's talking?
Culture, everyone. Linguistic diversity, cultural.
Oh, the room. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. So GST was the first major reform of the constitution since it was set up. Economic reform. There are many other constitutional changes, but it was the first major which created a single market for products. Okay, because GST is on goods and services. abolish laws, bureaucratic reform. Now, some of these things are in process. They are very hard. They are still going on and have to be completed. And the last one, which I had missed, was the social welfare reform. So provision of public goods, the direct benefit transfers. Those are new innovation, and getting public goods to every part of the country. So this whole thing about sanitation in rural areas, clean water, etc. So that is the inclusive part. So very quickly I'll give you some outcomes, because people talk a lot about what's happened and what's not happened. So this graph here basically is about what is called the worker population ratio. If that is growing, that means you're creating more jobs than the increase in workers or population. Okay? And the simple point is, you see those two graphs, they're moving up. Okay? People focus on what has happened from one point to the other. Well, we had the pandemic, all kinds of things went wrong. So you will see biased people will pick one point, other point is going down or up. What we have to look at when we think in the long term, when I try to develop policy and implement, you have to think of trends. Okay, so the trends are very clear. The worker population ratio is going up. Okay, that means more jobs are being created than the number of workers coming in. So that's the main point. The second one, which is hidden in that table, is about real wages. Okay, now real wages, they are basically three categories. It's hard to club them, because anybody who clubs it, there are a lot of problems. Why? Because we have three categories of workers called casual labor, salaried or regular workers, and self-employed. Self-employed are actually not workers in the traditional sense in which the world uses it. But we have a lot of that, so we have to account for it. So what I've done in this table is to look at the wages separately. Okay? And the amazing result for me was that the self-employed workers, sorry, let me just make sure I got that right here. Yeah. The casual workers had the highest real growth rate. Okay? That's what there is on the table. It's more than 4% per year. The self-employed had the second largest, more than 3% a year over this period. Again, I'm taking the whole period and looking at the trend. I'm not looking at individual points, because this is consistent set of data we have for 2017 to 2023. This is the only consistent, proper data set for these things. Okay? So the surprising thing is the salaried workers had the slowest growth. That's a whole issue in itself. I won't go into it. But what you hear from the public that, inverted growth, K growth, that is not there in the data. Okay? Like I said, the casual workers had the highest growth rate. It's not trickled down, it's trickled up. The salaried had the lowest. Okay? So I'm just alerting you to the kind of strange thing people talk. Next. Okay. So data. Okay, first the data. I use this word very much often. First the data, then the analysis, then the policy, finally the views. Ideology they do backwards. They already have views, you have an ideology, and then you manufacture the facts. Okay, so a little bit on inclusion and empowerment. So there's a concept of Antodaya, which is basic needs. Everybody in this country, we have 1.4 billion people. A certain proportion of them are really poor, maybe 10%. The exaggerated thing, people talk about 70%, 60%, they are stuck in 50 years ago. It's an absurd word. Sorry to be passionate. I've been in this business for 50 years. So they keep repeating the same thing. Many things I hear, I find amazing, because I heard them 25 years ago. It's all in my head here. Okay, I'm almost 75, and the living history is in my head. Obviously, the important things. It's not based on some books. So anyway, it used to be called basic needs. Politically, words keep changing. Doesn't matter. Whatever you want to call it, right? It used to be called basic needs, now we call it Antodaya. Okay, call it by any name, but the effect is the same. So I mentioned water and sanitation, electricity, housing, health, food, these are kind of basic stuff, right? I'll give you some data on that. And then this is, in my view, is new, is the empowerment. there is a very conscious effort of the Modi-led government to empower every category of people in this country. Of course, now the new emphasis is women, youth, poor, farmers, but it's all over. It's a group, it's geography. I can tell you, I have heard about the Northeast for 20 years in government. But the amount of work done in this 10 years to integrate the Northeast with the country is amazing. Frankly, it's really something, when people criticize Hindutva, Hindu government, you cannot imagine. This is not Hindutva. It is integration, that all our people are our people. Okay? And then, of course, I mentioned social sector. So the thing about social sector, the way I think of it is, see, government is a bureaucracy. It cannot get down. So at some point, NGOs have to be involved. When you're dealing with individuals, bureaucracy can save funds. It can build a road. But when you have to deal day to day with people, it has to be some form of NGO. Okay? I just heard from, okay? Next. So very quickly, some of the results. I guess we do have time, certain amount of time. Okay, so here are some numbers on what is called multi-dimensional poverty. Okay, so what we have is data based on NFHS 5 and 4. The latest one was 2019-21, and you can see the red line. It says minus, so these are positive in a way, right? The nutritional poverty has reduced. The different kinds of poverty, they call it poverty. It's again, it's funny. I call it nutrition. They call it nutritional poverty. Don't take me wrong, but it's like a poverty industry. There's a whole bunch of international people who thrive on the poverty industry. They are the consultants, they are the advisors. So they invent these indices. Anyway, again, what you call it is not important. The facts are clear. Okay, so every measure which I have given there, you can see there are health indicators, education standards, everything has improved. Okay, so that what they call they combine it into a multi-dimensional poverty index. We have done it in NITI also. That has gone down to 15%. Okay, so it's clearly reduced. The biggest reductions are in the most backward states, if you want to call them backward. We don't use the word backward now. Disadvantaged or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. So that is the result. This has happened from 2015 to 2019-21. Next. Okay. So now let's look at the future. So we are, this stuff is there, this is what has happened. Now we say, okay, we are really, you're telling us the past, but what about the future? You were talking about becoming a developed country, okay? So what we do is, what I did was, I look at the basic trends, and then develop forward. So I'll give you an idea of that. So that's the first one, right? So the biggest thing we have to look at is the demography. Now this is very important to understand, and it will something you should keep for the future. You're going to be out there in the world for the next 40 years. And these demographic, I think I removed the table, but it's very, very important table. What I look at is, again, we look at what is called the worker population age. No, it's not the ratio, sorry, I should have put it down. So it's the age group which will give the workers, right? So the old and the young are not the workers, right? Obvious. So you take let's say 19 to 64, right? So we look across the world and say what is happening to the share of that population in the world. So we're looking at India in the context of the whole world. And that's what I'm saying. It'll be important for you to know these trends are going to be there for the next 30 years, okay? And they're going to determine how economic activity happens. So in your future work, etc., it's very important. So I'll take a little bit of time. I should have brought the table. I think I removed it, sorry. So what is happening? So what I do is I look at the developed countries, some middle income countries which are relevant to us where we compare, and I'll give you quick numbers. So what are the developed countries? I focus on the 5 major countries, which is US, EU, UK, Japan and South Korea. Okay? And then in the lower category you have the upper middle income countries, because China is the most prominent, but Thailand and so on. A few selected countries who you can think of as broadly are potential competitors, right? They have similar sort of stuff, we may be competing with them. And then there's Vietnam, which is actually a lower middle income country. So there's the upper middle countries like Thailand, Malaysia, etc., who are slightly ahead of us. We are still going to become upper middle by 31, right? So you look at the past changes in this worker population, working age population, okay, I've got it, WAP, okay, working age population. And in all these countries, the share of working age population of the world is going to go down. The biggest change is coming in China, okay, the share of the working age population will go down by 13 percent points in China, and every country I've mentioned there is a decline. Okay, the only country where there's an increase is India. So that is going to be a big driver. Okay, I'll give you a little idea of how that affects this broad thing I'm saying. Okay, so let me just mention all these other things, and perhaps in the questions we can take up some of these which interest you. There's no point me talking of things which are not interesting. So that is one big trend that we are in effect. It's what I call our dynamic comparative advantage. I'll leave that with you. Will shift from lower skilled occupations to middle skilled occupation to high skilled. Now you might say we already export high skills to the world, but remember, we are not talking about 1 million or 2 million people. We are talking about 1.4 billion people. That's what I have to be concerned about. That is my job, the macro. I have to look at everything. Okay? So when I say we are talking about the huge average, okay? Right now we really have to focus on the lower skills to achieve these goals. That doesn't mean nothing else is happening. Everything else is also happening. Okay? Then climate change and energy. This our approach. I'm going to leave it past the conclusion unless there's time. That obviously everybody has heard of. That's the big news in the world. The fourth point here, which is very important, is the geopolitics of oil. Okay? We are heavily dependent on oil. So every time oil prices rise, we have a problem. Okay? Again, if I may put it very simply, this is something again the papers and the experts don't tell you. A rise in the oil price is not just an issue of fiscal deficit or current account, which you'll read about in the papers. It's a transfer of income. It's like a tax. When we have a tax on the public, the tax becomes revenues for the government and we spend it back into the economy. An oil price rise is like a tax on the Indian people. This money goes away. It's a huge problem for us. Okay, but this is also an opportunity. Okay, so solar. Just to give you a simple hint, right? So if we can do solar power and become less dependent on oil, it'll be a huge growth driver for us. Aggression, threat of war. You heard of China and there are wars happening all over the place. But for us, it's an opportunity to become self-reliance in defense equipment. So that's an opportunity also. It's a threat, but an opportunity. Depends on how you use it. If you develop a production structure, you're developing the economy and you're developing employment, you're developing all those things which we want. And then finally, this is the most important, which I'm going to speak a lot more on, is the supply chain. You heard of things like decoupling, de-risking. Americans talk about it. If not, I'll give you a little idea. That everybody is too dependent on the Chinese market, Chinese exports. So there used to be a saying, China is the factory of the world. What people have realized, it's also the monopoly of the world. And you don't like monopolies. Okay? Next. So there are all these opportunities. This is the big opportunity which I ended with, because I'm going to say more about that. But there are also weaknesses, which people keep talking about. And again, the way I look at it, given that I have to try and do something about it, is how can we turn this into an opportunity? So we know that basic education and job skills are a big problem. So there's a World Bank study which shows that 55% cannot read properly at primary school end. So there's a basic problem with basic education. Again, remember, we are not talking just about you, the higher end of the urban spectrum. We are talking about a country of 1.4 billion people. Feeble labor force participation is improved. That has not yet been noted. There was a big decline. It's beginning to improve, but it's still way lower than the average of the world. Agricultural diversification. Again, I won't have time to this, but this issue comes up. I've left it in the appendix in case there's some question. And this is the key one I want to talk about now, is the manufacturing share in value added and exports. So structurally, most countries go through a phase where agriculture is the main thing, which was for us, but then the population and the value added in agriculture goes up, manufacturing increases, and then finally services. That's been the pattern in the world. We didn't have that pattern. But now we have an opportunity due to what I said at the end, this supply chain diversification de-risking issue. So import substitution of Chinese imports and joining MNC supply chain. That's a huge opportunity which we must take advantage of. Oh, I did have the demography. So sorry, I should have left it to talk about it, but you just have to see the names I mentioned there, the countries and the red numbers there. You see they are all red. Okay. So just to give you a few examples, countries like Germany, Japan, Russia, their population is already declining. They're going to have serious problems. Okay. But again, problem is an opportunity for us. They won't have enough people. Okay. So this demography is going to drive a lot of things. Yeah, the comparative admission was mentioned at the bottom. Okay, let's move on. I've already talked about it. Just see the graph and see that green thing at the bottom there. Okay, that is our opportunity. Next. So in the short run, what we have to do is maximize the manufacturing employment. Okay, where is the opportunity? The high-income developed countries. That's why I showed all of them there in the numbers. For those who don't know, there's a list of names there. These economies are complementary in terms of comparative advantage. Okay. They are the source of technology and FDI. They are the largest market for manufactured exports. 2/3 of the supply chains are held by MNCs, most of whom are in these 5 countries. But a huge part of it is in the US. Okay? And there's a close association between multinational, sometimes they call MNEs, but FDI in a country and its imports of merchandise from the country. So think of this, right? Where is the opportunity? I'm telling you where the opportunity is, okay, for manufacturing. So we need to give red carpet treatment to greenfield FDI, what is called, new companies, new multinational enterprises, like Apple, Foxconn, Micron. That's what we are doing, okay? And next, so just to give you a little numbers, for those who like numbers, this is a table which shows there are 4 columns, 2 for outward FDI and 2 for manufactured imports. This is the same point I'm making. You get the MNCs here, they create jobs, they create skills, and then they export. Okay? So you want to be part of those MNCs, we completely missed out. Okay? So just to read out some numbers from there. So they are the source, these 5 countries, developed countries, are the source of 60% of global FDI. Which is 7 times China. A lot of people still they've been talking about China for 20 years. But they are very small globally to the extent it's relevant to us, India, 1.4 billion people. So imports, 53% of world manufactured imports. That's the key here. We're talking about manufacturers. These are 5 times China's imports. And just these three countries, smallest, Japan, UK, Korea, constitute as large a market for foreign manufactured goods as China. So what is the consequence? What is the bottom line? We need to have some forms of FTAs with US, EU, UK so that we can integrate the economies and make use of this comparative advantage. Again, retail, back to that demography. Okay, it's in their interest. Next. Because they have also become so dependent on China, and that is this. Okay, the next one. So, factory of the world of global manufacturing monopoly. China has a monopoly. I've given you a list of things here, but what is very dangerous actually for all of us is the monopoly they have in telecom, ADP and electronics, which is 40% of world exports. The purple numbers there with the red numbers. Why? Because it's possible to monitor and spy, let's be very blunt about it, every single piece of equipment they have supplied. For those of you who find that strange, I don't know, if I'm sure you don't, you're still open to it. I'll give you an example. About 2 months ago, some company which is based in Haryana-Rajasthan border, they found that the machine they had bought, it's amazing, okay? The machine they had bought, it's capital equipment, right? They are using it to make whatever, pipes or whatever it is, right? That switched off on 31st December 2023.
Okay.
Just switched off. It wouldn't work.
Bye.
You're desperate, what's happened? They called up the manufacturer, exporter. They said, oh, sorry, there was some code we had to set. They reset the code, they gave the code. The code had to be entered to restart the machine. Just imagine, this is a commercial operation making some simple thing. I don't want to say the exact thing because, think of some metal part. They can switch off that machine. Just imagine the telecom equipment. I am paranoid. About my computer. Every Chinese made laptop, they can probably hear what you're doing. That's why I'm giving you the example, because people in US just wouldn't believe me. I've been saying it for 20 years. Now they're finding reams of evidence. Every day there's a case of spying. Anyway, let me leave it at that. The point here is that if this kind of monopoly existed in the US, they call it antitrust. They would go after those companies. But globally, the world has been sleeping for 20 years. So that is why you need de-risking. Everybody who the Chinese don't like, okay, we know they don't like us, they try to invade us once in a while, need to diversify out of China. And this is a big opportunity for us. Okay, whether you work in manufacturing or not, or if you are involved, as a professional also you can ensure and make use of these opportunities. That's why I'm telling you. Okay, next. So that is the immediate one, but there's skills. Most likely many of you will be working in services, so part of that same demographics is that this new word, the exact words are mine, but the sentiment is the PM's. He said it some other way, I don't know exactly how. But the idea is skill for India, skill for the world, and it's linked to the demography. Okay? They will need these skills. So let's start with the domestic, and the next one I'll tell you the international one. So connectivity, we need universal. I've been pressing this for the last 10 years. Okay, but the full understanding is not there, it's coming, it takes time. Okay, it's not a favor to the rural, it's what we need. That's how we are going to become developed. Okay, we have to connect every single village in this country. Semi-skilled, skilled intensive, I mentioned, you may not realize what it means. Construction, repair and maintenance. Construction is not only those guys working, hauling bricks. Okay? It's the electrician, it's the plumber. What I give the example, it's repair and maintenance. Huge industry it can be. Okay? The example I give is about a year ago, I learnt about a big construction company. They had openings for 100,000, which is 1 lakh construction workers. Now you may say, what? Why can't they find construction workers? So when you think of a plumber, you're thinking, भाई वो टैप लीक कर रहा है, उसको आके fix करो. Okay? When they think of a plumber, they are thinking of building a chemical plant where you need people to fit those pipes. They are different levels. So it's a very complex, there are a huge number of skills. You think of every category, there are skills from the bottom to the roof. Okay? So there are all kinds of skills needed. Again, health and wellness I'll come back to because a lot of women are involved in health and education skilling. But I asked the principal, what about electronics? Using digital methods. Digital is going to be another big thing in India. So if you don't have any digital competence, please acquire it. And I'll give you one example. I'm taking a lot of time, but tell me if I'm running too much of the time, okay? I give the example because you can connect with it. These words mean nothing unless... after I joined Niti about 14 months ago, there are two things I said I must find out. One was the labor laws. Okay, I took a review. And the second one was skills. Okay, and one of the most amazing things I came across is a program called is a set of programs what is called Diksha. Okay, you've been nodding. Have you heard of it? No. You have? Okay, good. So it's like every book has a barcode. Okay, you scan the barcode. Okay, so you have books for every school class, and you have different types of books. You scan the barcode, and the person, it takes you to lessons, variants of lessons. Obviously, it won't be exactly the way the book is. You can read the book. The amazing thing about it is that they did a review. By the way, technically, there are 4 states which have really adopted it because you got to adapt it to every state, right? Our states are varied. I mean, just to give you one trivial example, the counting in Kerala, you have to count coconuts. You have to make it relatable. So that whole books have been changed. Okay, this whole thing has to be adapted. Okay, everything, so that the child can understand. 4 states have gone all out, and then they did a review of these 4 states, if I remember correctly. And what they found was, before every lesson, there was a huge jump in, because it's all online, right? You can access it. Before every class, like on Saturday, Sunday, so you go back to school on Monday, right? There was a big jump in usage. So what was happening? They were wondering. Children were, before going to school, were looking at the lesson. And then they found they were asking teachers unpleasant questions, having obviously the brightest girl, in fact, there were many girls. So, who were more diligent actually, in the rural areas particularly. So the teachers started looking at this thing, okay, and using it. So it is not, my point is 2 things here. One is how easy it became, and second, the teachers can use this technology. Remember, there will be all kinds of teachers in the rural areas. They just have to use this and be sure they know what they are talking about. And then it always helps the personal relationship. Okay? That's what the teacher is. He or she can see the face of the child. Is he learning or is she learning, or what do I need to say? But these aids can help the teachers as much, and in my view, more. The other story connected to it was slightly minor. They already also found that a few children were going to the railway station, which had provided Wi-Fi, and using it there. Poor kids, obviously, who don't have access. Okay? So that is the power of digital. I'm just giving you one example because I removed the slide. Okay, next one. So let's go quickly over the global. So manufacturing, unbundling and dispersion will occur. Service unbundling and hybrid systems. This is global now I'm talking, and I'll again give you a little story after I've said all these words, which makes you understand. So business centers, there's already evolution. Fintech, high-end R&D is being done in Bangalore. But health and physical education and skilling, lifetime learning, government administration. Here is the story. I was in OECD about 9 months ago. I was invited for something. And they had these two experts talking about something. And I found that they have no idea what's happening in India's digital. Of course, you all heard of UPI, etc. But there is now a shortage of government servants in the OECD countries. They don't have enough people to provide the government type of services. So what is going to happen is that all these services over the next 20 years are going to get unbundled. Okay, some things will be done in India if we use the opportunity. You don't have to do everything there. Take the example of visa. The final visa decision will have to be those countries. They don't want to outsource that. But a lot of the processing, which in India is already being done by private companies, will happen in India. Right now, this is happening only for visas they issue to Indians. In principle, it can be for visas everywhere. Like that, there are many services. Okay, they are going to be unbundled and say, okay, you guys have the population, etc., you do it. Demographic decline. See, the alternative is to have immigration, but there's huge anti-immigration sentiment there. So this first thing, which benefits us, I think it's much better for us that instead of our people leaving and going and settling in US and EU, they get the job from here. Okay? So that is one big thing. And a part of that is work from home, work from anywhere. Because of the pandemic, everybody got used to, including the employees. Again, there is an important trend which you must understand. Employees and employers both got used to it. And then the next step was work from anywhere. So if you can work from home, why not from anywhere? That's a big new trend which again favors us. Just imagine what that means. That is not only part of this, but women who are educated and living in rural areas can now do a work which is happening in Bangalore or Paris. Okay? A big trend in this digital thing. Next. Okay. Sorry. Should we try and wind down? Okay. So I had two slides. I'll just pick out. This is the digital one is just there. So there are two things, scalability problem and get right information to the right people. So this is what I gave you the example of Diksha. You can do that in a lot of other things. Okay? Scalability, the quality. You can never, it would take you 50 years to raise the quality of rural teaching, for example, or rural doctors, or they are often not doctors, they are fake doctors, up to the level of urban areas. Okay, but it can be done digitally. So, and the second one is getting right information to the right people. Again, I had an example, but I won't give it. Next. And then I just mention one more thing here. Let's see, where is it? So the places. So skill generation for women, matching supply and demand, deepen skill certification, and remove discrimination. So all these issues are special to women, which we must address. Next one. Social constraint. This is something which you can contribute if you or any of your staff have thought about these issues. I'm happy to meet. I mean, this is what I have understood. There are childcare issues. There are all kinds of issues. So the basis of this is that the results show that unmarried women and unmarried men, the gap has closed. Especially for educated, sorry, I should focus it. And it's almost the same as in US. So there is, in effect, no problem there now. Unmarried, educated women versus unmarried men in India and US is now gaps are similar. Okay, that means we've got that. Fine. So the issue remains of married women. Okay, so how to change that, how to help, etc. was this graph. Next. So last 2 points which are is okay. So we have to do all this. Okay, I'm telling you these things partly because they are under my purview as far as thinking goes. At least they're all ministries, departments who are doing. Remember, I have not told you the tens of programs which are doing this. I didn't come here to do that, but they are there. Okay, and they are helping in this. Let's not forget it. Okay, but so what this is 3 projections. And I kind of explained to you earlier, I'll leave it to if there's any time for discussions. But this, I put it because it's always good to see it relative. So what I've done is, instead of giving you absolute numbers which have no meaning, I mean, if I tell you this is 10,000 or something, it doesn't mean anything, right? So what I've done is given it relative to China. So the per capita GDP, which is the main driver of where we get to upper middle. So what this shows is there are three parts, which is real growth of 5.9, 6.4 and 6.9. So that is the range of growth which I have assumed the real growth, okay, which is the growth in GDP, PPP. Because remember what I said, if you have to compare, it has to be PPP. We are comparing welfare, which you measure by per capita average income. Per capita GDP is just average income. You can think of it as the income of the average person. Okay. So what this shows is basically is showing you by that the middle, the green one, which is the middle, will be an upper middle income country by 2031. And upper middle, and a high income country by 2047. That's the green part based on 6.4% growth in GDP. Okay. Next. Now, people always confuse. They say, "Oh, this is fine. We'll be per capita income, but what about this health indicator, that social indicator?" Well, this graph I've given, I've picked out one indicator. And what we do is we take all the countries for which this indicator, this is just an illustration. So I take life expectancy, which is a summary measure of health outcomes. Okay, it's the best summary measure. One measure if you want, look at life expectancy. So what I've done is I've taken life expectancy for all the countries for which it's available and plotted it against the per capita GDP of that date. Okay, it has to be the same date. So it tells you when they were at that per capita income, this was their life expectancy. And then we've drawn a graph through it. So that the best graph, best fitting graph that we can find. Okay? And you can see that India is that red dot. We are very close to the line. Maybe a little low. Okay? So when people say, "Oh, it's terrible, you'll compare with X country, Y country," fine. So you don't have to run down the country for saying, "Okay, this is fine, we are at the average, but we want to be better than the average." Fine. But don't run down yourself. And behind this, there's another lesson here. So we look, okay, why is it that we have lower life? It turns out the male life expectancy is higher than that line. The female is below it. So instead of breastfeeding, you say, okay, let's analyze the thing and what does it tell us? So you found one result, simple result, just by looking at the graphs. Then I say, okay, what other indicators are available? Well, it turns out globally, the only other thing we can find is mortality. So you look at the mortality and again you find the same thing. You find that it's female mortality which is higher. So what is happening is my preliminary conclusion is that women do not get the same medical attention as men do. So they die more. Okay? If there's a crisis, male crisis, the woman's crisis, the male gets the first choice, so to say. I mean, it's complicated, but okay? So this is the point I make. This is the same thing will happen for other health, education and sanitary measures. So what does the government do? Government has to focus on what we call public goods and quasi-public goods, right? There are things that private sector can do. I've been investigating, I've talked to tens of skilling companies, okay? And there are areas which will be covered by the private sector, which you can imagine is the high-end, highly profitable stuff. Where the government has to do is the low end, where there's no profits, okay? Okay, and last one. So, conclusion. GDP growth rate of 6 to 7% is possible based on the reforms I've said. A growth rate of between 6 and 7% is possible, and that's all that is needed. People who talk, World Bank says you need 8%. I disagree. Okay? And the rest of it which I've just told you. Just go to the next two. I just want to say that these are there in case Green India is a very important part, and the final one, just for information, is agriculture and rural. So we don't neglect it, we don't want to, but because of lack of time, I won't be talking. Thank you. We can take questions if you have time. Take the questions if they have time.
Yes.